The 4% rule is under attack. Dave Ramsey says it's absolutely wrong. Suze Orman says it's dangerous, but they're coming at it from opposite ends. Dave Ramsey says 8% is okay. Suze Orman says 3% is all the higher you can go. Let's actually look at some numbers. And what we do on this channel is we use 100 years of data from the S&P 500. We project what similar returns might do for you in the future, and the resulting numbers are simply a possible range. But we're going to look at actual numbers. What would happen if we look at the last 100 years worth of numbers and project them ahead for the future? How would it have worked out with these new numbers? Let's look at Dave Ramsey's reasoning. Let's say, for example, you got $600,000 saved up. We could use any number here because we're going to be looking at percentages. In Dave Ramsey's mind, if you did the 4% rule, which he says is way too low, here's $2,000 a month, 4%. Say you need $4,000 a month. He says that means you'd keep working because you only have $600,000 and you're only taking out $2,000 a month. But if you need $4,000 a month, not taking into account Social Security, you'd have to work for another who knows how many years to reach twice that amount. Suze Orman, on the other hand, says that's too high and you need to take out $1,500. So let's look at the actual numbers here. Let's look at Dave Ramsey's numbers first. In Dave Ramsey's mind, if the stock market's been averaging 12% and you're getting 12% in your mutual funds, we're just looking at the S&P 500, you should be able to take out $4,000 a month, which allows you to retire. If that's what you need, $4,000 a month, $600,000 would be enough. That would be an 8%. This is the percentage right here. So if you run the numbers, you're going to see no problem. Here are the actual numbers going down through after 10 years of withdrawing 4% a year. We're increasing that by 3% a year, by the way, giving them a COLA. There's the 4,000, increasing by 3%. You're getting 12%. So all this is your nest egg is just going to grow and grow and grow because you're not even coming close to taking out this 12%. What's the problem with that reasoning? You don't average 12% a year. Let's look what happens when you do this. I'm going to go ahead and do 1925 on. We're going to run the numbers for every single year, but watch what happens when we use actual numbers. This is what we're going to do. These are the actual returns for the S&P 500, which has averaged over 11% over the last 100 years. But look at this. If we run into a decade like the 30s or the 2000s, you're going to run out of money. If you have some down years, consecutive down years like that, you're going to run into some problems. Let's look at the actual numbers here when we do a reset to not 12%, but what you actually would have gotten. If you use 1925 numbers going down through here, you'd have 4 good years before you got hit with the depression years. You'd be running out of money in 18 years. But let's go ahead and run the numbers here. Again, this is withdrawing 8%. Because Dave Ramsey says 4% is way too low. So we're going to update this and see what the numbers actually show. How many times in the last 100 years the user returns going forward would you run out of money? 35% of the time running out of money in 20 years, 39% of the time running out of money in 30 years. In fact, you'd actually run out of money in 4.4% of the time in less than 10 years. If we use 1929 numbers, you're out of money in 5 years. 1930, out of money in 6 years. 1931, you're out of money in 10 years. So you're taking out way too much. Dave would say, no, you're getting 12%, so you can take out 8%, but that's not realistic. You don't get 12% every year. Some years you can have down years. In fact, 35% of the time, your numbers would have failed you. Let's go ahead and some people will say, no, it's not 8% of each year. It's 8% of the remaining balance. So let's go ahead and do that. 8% of the remaining balance right here, 1925, 8% of the remaining balance. Let's see here. You'd be okay for a while if you had numbers like 1925 going for, but look what happens. This is what you'd be taking, 8% of the remaining balance. You'd never run out of money, no. You would have 92% of your money left every year because you're only taking 8% of what you got remaining. But look what you'd be down to. If you're planning down $4,000 a month to live on, and you hit these down years, especially, let's just click on 1929. You'd be down to only be able to withdraw $915 a month. If you're planning on living on $4,000 a month and can only have $915, no, you wouldn't run out of money. But because of these 4 down years, your balance has been knocked down so low that you could only take out $915. That'd be 8% of the remaining balance. So it doesn't matter whether you do remaining balance, In that case, you'd be living on a lot less than you're planning on, or if you did just 8% of the beginning in 1929 numbers, you'd be out of money in 5 years. All right, let's go ahead and run the numbers for Suze Orman. Suze Orman says 4% is too high. So let's see what her numbers look like. Here's what happens if you take out 3% of your beginning balance. If we have years like 1925, returns like 1925 going forward, you'd have no problem. This is a summary box for the 1925 numbers. Look, this is withdrawing 3%, which starts out at $1,500 a month, increases that by 3% a year. What would you have left after 10 years? $718,000. You can see it right there. 1.336 million after 20 years. You can see it right there. And 5.568 million 30 years down the road. Now, here's the only time you'd have any kind of an issue in the last 100 years doing 3% a year, 1929. You'd actually be down to 57,773 after 20 years if we had returns. Again, folks, this is the worst 100-year period. So do you really want to limit yourself to 4% or 3% a year? You'd have so much money left after all these years. You can see these numbers going down through the millions. Do you really want to limit yourself to those kind of numbers? Let's just run the actual 4% rule, the rule that Dave Ramsey and Suze Orman are both against from opposite ends of the spectrum, by the way. But let's do the actual 4% rule. Here are the number of times you would have run out of money in the last 100 years doing the 4% rule. 2% of the time after 20 years and 4% of the time after 30 years. That's why the 4% rule has stood the test of time, because in almost every scenario, you're okay except the worst case scenario in the last 100 years. So I guess you could say Suze Orman would be more correct than Dave Ramsey would be, because taking 3% out, you're gonna be okay 100% of the time. But let's go ahead and look at these numbers a little bit. Why in the world wouldn't you want to limit yourself? Let's do one more thing. Let's actually go with 5%, just to show you how this changes. We're going to do 5%, which would be 2,500. Yeah, 5%. If you had 600,000, 2,500 a month. Let's go ahead and update this. Right now we have a 2% running out of money with a 4% rule. How about the 5% rule? Withdrawing 5%, you'd still have a 95% success rate after 20 years, only failing 4.9% of the time. Most of those during the Depression years. We're actually having a time period where if you had year 2000 was also a bad string of years there. Then you'd be running out of money in 16 years. 1999, okay. 2001, okay. But this just shows you sneak up to 5%. Yeah, you still got a 95% success rate. Let's do one more thing. Let's go up to 6%, which would be 3%, getting away from the 4% rule, getting closer to Dave Ramsey's 8% rule. Let's go ahead and update these numbers. Here's a 6%. That'd be $3,000 a month. 6% withdrawal rate. You're going to run out of money if we use the numbers for the last 30 years, 11% of the time potentially. You'd have an 89% success rate, but 11% failure rate. Well, look how it drops down going from the 20th year to the 30th year. Now you got a 86% success rate, but a 14% failure rate. Let's do one more thing. Let's go to the 7%. If we do 7%. 7% is a lot closer to Dave Ramsey's 8% rule than Suze Orman's 3% or the 4% rule. Then in this case, you got a 20% failure rate. You can see a lot more during the Depression years, and also around the year 2000, you can see a lot of failure rates right there. Here's 1999 running out of, this is a summary box for 1999, running out of money in 12 years, 2000 running out of money in 10 years, 2001 running out of money in 12 years, and so on. So you can see the 7% rule, 20% of the time you'd be failing in the first 20 years, withdrawing 7%. Again, let's do one more thing just for review, showing Dave Ramsey's numbers at 8%. These are the numbers we first showed you. Dave Ramsey 8% rule. In the last 100 years, we'll project those returns going ahead. You'd fail 35% of the time in the first 20 years. having a 65% success rate. And if you go out 30 years, you're going to have basically a 40% failure rate doing this 8%. Why? Because you don't get 12% every year. You might average that, but you could have some down years. They call this a sequence of returns risk. You have for example, 3 down years, you're going to be running out of money in 9 years. I just wanted to cover this. Is 3% too low? Is 8% too high? Hopefully you see that 8% is way too high when you have this kind of a failure rate. But really, do you need to go down to a 3% failure rate when in that case you'd never have a problem except in 1929 when you get close to 30 years? Looks like the 4% rule holds true. Again, does anybody know the future? We don't know what kind of returns we're going to have, but if in the worst case scenario in the last 100 years, the 4% rule works in almost every case, why would we go less than that? So you end up only taking 3%, meaning you're probably going to be working longer because you're thinking 3%, I can't afford to live on $1,500 a month. I need $4,000 a month or $3,000 a month. Of course, we haven't taken into account Social Security, which we do in other videos, but do you really want to limit yourself to 1,500 and say, then this 600,000 isn't near enough. If I need 2 or 3,000 a month plus my Social Security, I'm going to have to work longer. The 4% rule would allow you to do 2% with $2,000 on this right here. And if you had 2,000 for Social Security, you'd have your 4,000 a month. But that's some of the other videos we look at. Again, the 3% rule, you're probably taking out too little, and definitely the 8% rule, you're taking out way too much. But that's what we do on this channel. We love running numbers. We love to look at what people are talking about. And we build spreadsheets that can truly change your life when you see the numbers. Please consider subscribing to this channel. Please share it with others. Let people know that we do videos like this that just run numbers for people. This just show you how beneficial it can be for the S&P 500 if you're in it for the long term, especially if you stick close to the 4% rule. Thanks for watching.